And Chair, we are now live.
Thank you. I'd like to call to order this meeting by first acknowledging that we are on the traditional land of the Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And this territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship. I now call this meeting to order. So on today's agenda for our meeting, we're going to first start. I'm just going through some. We have a bit on the agenda today. And so we're going to now move over to the first order of business and approval of additions and deletions.
If I could, Chair.
Approval of minutes, pardon me.
Yeah.
Am I able to get is someone able to move?
I'll move the approval of minutes.
I'd second that.
Excellent, thank you. And we will now move on to point 3, the approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions.
Well, Madam Chair, you have to call the vote on the motion on the minutes.
Oh, right. Thank you for reminding me. Can we have a vote on the motion of the minutes, which would be that Point Pleasant Park Advisory Committee rescind item 9.2.1 from the December.
Chair, sorry to interrupt. The motion would be that the minutes of March 2nd, 2023 be approved as circulated.
Oh, pardon me. And thank you, everyone. I'm noticing that I'm always giving way more information, so I'll do my best to keep it more brief. So yes, can we vote to move the motion that the minutes from March 2nd be approved and the additions and deletions? All in favor, say aye.
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 And all against would say nay. And feel free if you need to raise your hand using the Zoom raise hand button at the bottom of the screen. Okay. Do we have the votes in now?
Yes, Chair, that would be considered that everyone was in favor.
Thank you. So from there, we're going to move on to section 4, which is the business arising out of the minutes.
I'm sorry, Chair, but we would be moving on to section 3, the approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions.
Okay, my mistake. I apologize. I thought we just did that. Whew, okay. So now let's approve the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. And I would imagine that we do a vote again, just like that last time. So all those in favor, say aye.
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 All those against, nay. Okay, we are have a unanimous vote for that.
Chair, I'm very sorry. I would just need a mover and a seconder for the motion.
Okay.
I would move the approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions.
I'll second that.
Okay. Are we good to move on to number 4?
All in favor?
Oh, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Anyone against? We have our votes. So we'll move on from there to any business arising out of the minutes. I am not aware of any business that has come out of the minutes. Would anyone else like to take the floor?
Chair, there is no business arising out of the minutes.
Okay, I was just double checking because I didn't see any. So I didn't want to cut anyone off again. Thanks, everyone. So since there's no business from the minutes, we're now going to move on to the call for declaration of conflict of interest. And I can see no information or details under this, so I believe that we don't have to discuss anything on that. Am I correct?
It would just be that if there are any committee members who have a conflict of interest, they would just need to declare that right now. But that's about it.
Okay. And thank you for your support through this. Now we'll move on to number 6. We're just going through so quickly today. Consideration of deferred business. And there is none on the bill for today. 7, we're going to touch on correspondence, petitions, and delegations. Is there any correspondence?
There was correspondence received and circulated for items 9.1. And that's everything for correspondence.
So, and there were no petitions and no presentations.
There were no petitions received by the clerk's office, and there are no presentations scheduled for the meeting today.
Thank you.
This is Ted. Can I interrupt for a sec? So the correspondence that was shared with us since the previous meeting, is that something that would normally come up in this meeting?
So the correspondence that was shared specifically for item 9.1 is the one that you received today. Previous correspondence is being circulated as general correspondence since it doesn't relate to a specific item on the agenda.
I'm just wondering, are those ever discussed with the committee?
So if you feel that the committee needs to discuss any of the correspondence received, if it's an issue that needs to be tackled, it can be discussed during the meeting.
Okay. And when would the appropriate time be for that?
That would be after staff presentations. We can have it as an added item. And then if it's something that staff can address, staff can help answer any questions that the committee might have.
Great. Thank you. I wouldn't mind the opportunity just to follow up on those.
Sure thing.
Thank you. We will now move to information items brought forward. And at this time, there are none. We will then move on to motions of rescission from December 1st, 2022. Councillor Mason brought forward the motion that Point Pleasant Park Advisory Committee rescind item 9.2.1 from the December 1st, 2022 Point Pleasant Park Advisory Committee meeting, which requested a staff report as follows. that the Point Pleasant Park Advisory Committee recommends that the Halifax and West Community Council direct the Chief Administrative Officer to prepare a staff report evaluating the possible reinstating of dedicated park patrol in Point Pleasant Park.
So moved.
May we have a seconder, please?
Second that.
Thank you. And then from there, please direct me. I think that we now review that topic and the information that was sent to us.
So you'd normally let the person who moved the motion and provide the notice speak first, then you would keep a speakers list and we'd all discuss in order if others wanted to speak to it.
Thank you very much. So please, can the mover, I believe that was Wei, can you please speak to this? And then I will keep a list of speakers and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be very brief, and I'm actually going to ask Adam or someone from staff if they want to jump in. So what happened, though, it's awkward because Adam wasn't the staffer at the time, so he may not have the background recognizing that, Adam, is we made the motion in good faith. The previous chair was concerned about the lack of routine non-police patrol in the park, especially at night. And then what happened is we asked for a staff report, and staff came to me immediately afterwards within a month and said, that's in the business plan for Parks and Recreation for the coming year, or it was already in the business plan. It was already underway. And that's what I'd asked staff to clarify. And so rather than having them working on a report that states we're already doing it, I think, that's work. It's work for staff to do staff reports, especially if they don't have any effect, right? Council's already approved the budget. This is already something that's happening. So I'm wondering if staff could comment on that for clarity to the committee.
Yeah, so we are getting two officers at some point for parks within the next year. Now they won't be directly with parks operations. They'll be kind of doing parks as a whole. But I guess that would kind of help with the park, with the, I guess, park patrol within Point Pleasant Park.
So with that was the intention of the motion, was to try and get something like that, where we used to have the commissioner in the truck driving around, flashing the light from the little thing he had by the driver's side, so that we had a more routine and, frankly, I just got to say, less expensive patrol. Like the police don't really have time to do the patrols on a regular basis, but when they do, that's $140,000 an officer, roughly, if they've been there for 5 years, driving around looking in the park to see if anybody's got fires going or something like that. So, with that in mind, I was asked to bring this forward to ask the committee if we would rescind that motion so they don't have to generate a staff report that will effectively say what Adam just told us.
Do we have any other individuals that would like to speak on this matter before we make a motion to vote?
I would just say it seems like a sensible thing to do, to rescind that.
I agree. It does seem logical. And then I think too, in order to achieve more traction with our goals, this would be more seamless.
So if there's no further speakers, Carl, I'm going to drop into teacher mode. And also, I feel a lot of sympathy for you, because not everybody was a model parliament nerd in high school like me. So it's not like this rule stuff is actually, it's not a great way to run an advisory committee. And I'm working on that with the clerk, but it's the rules right now. So what you would do if no one else is prepared to speak or wishes to speak, you would say, so if there's no further speakers, let's move to a vote. All those in favor, you just make it happen.
Thank you. Yes, so I've had no messages or hands up, so we have no further speakers. Let's go to vote so that we can take care of this issue, or take care of this matter. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All those against or with questions say nay. Okay, we have another unanimous vote. We have voted as an advisory committee to rescind that motion. Okay, and I'm just bringing up my notes here, so give me 1 sec. Okay. Now we move on to reports and discussion. Anyone have anything to contribute to reports and discussion?
So Chair, you would move on to item 10.1.1, which is the Point Pleasant Park operations update.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to the Point Pleasant Park operations update. And we were as well. Yeah, am I right? Well,
pardon me, you cut out there for a second.
Has everyone had time to review?
I'm sorry, Carlin, I believe you cut off for a second, but Ian Kennedy can speak to item 10.1.1.
Excellent, thank you.
Perfect. Can everybody hear me?
Yes,
Hi, everyone. How are you?
doing well. Thank you.
So I'm going to provide a parks update. We met recently, so it hasn't changed all too much because we're kind of in the same mode. There's a few things I'll mention that came up today that aren't in this, but based right now, we're coming out of winter. In winter, we mostly focus on the park and outer sites, but in the past 2 months, we have been short-staffed, so we've been focusing on the roads quite a bit, and a big focus, as always, on removal of hazardous and invasive trees. We were fortunate enough over the end of winter and early spring to collaborate with urban forestry, which normally works outside of parks, to remove some more persistent trees. Some trees that are, let's say, older than maybe too old, that are posing a threat to the park. If you've been in the park, you've probably noticed. A lot of them are more around the larger roadways, parking lots, and site amenities, rather than the interior, more to make it less hazardous for people and their cars. Moving into the summer, we unfortunately, as I mentioned in the last meeting, we don't have student staff this year as it was removed from the budget. We hope to have that back next year. But right now our seasonal staff has returned, and not fully. We're still waiting on 2 vacancies, but they should be filled in the next few weeks. A lot of the focus right now is on shoreline cleanup of the green space areas, and like I said, roadways, and moving of road material like crusher dust, which tends to navigate into the woods and off the side of the roads. We are in a rainy season, so staff is very focused on culverts, ditches, and drainage. The drainage in the park is quite old, so it's kind of an ongoing routine for staff every day to stay on top of it, or else the roads will wash away. As well, right now, our focus is on the park, but also on the oncoming special events season. Our staff takes part in the special events task force, which we take part in implementing events throughout the city. A few of them this year are taking place in the park, such as North American Indigenous Games, which we're prepping for, and other events with community groups, such as races and what am I trying to say? Community events, both with universities and organizations, things like daycares that are all planned and booked, and in prepping for that. In terms of operation projects that are now complete or to be completed, some of these have been mentioned before, but are just now being completed. You may have noticed the NASCAD Residence Grounds projects. That was just finalized a few weeks ago and will now be in place in the park till May 25th. There's signage posted around the park with information and interactive QR codes to guide park goers in relation to those art pieces. It went pretty well in the full lead up to the process. We've had a few hiccups since their implementation, which you've probably seen on the news. But otherwise, things have gone pretty well. Through the summer, we're going to look at more infrastructure to be installed to increase signage, especially for on-leash and off-leash bylaws. Complaints and service requests have come in on that, and a lot of signs have been removed. So we're going to work on increasing already existing signage and maybe focusing already existing signage rather than having too many signs. Focus areas on having the right signs or the right information so that park goers do understand what bylaws are in place in regard to that. And this would be in direct response to service requests and things that have come through from the councillor and from the public and from in-person meetings with people in the park. As well, we're going to put replace signposts within the park that are receiving damage. A lot of our wooden signposts over the winter met vandalism, so we're going to replace those with metal signposts so that it's not a constant upkeep of having to replace a wooden sign that has a sign that's essential to implementing bylaw. I mentioned this in the last meeting, but we're going ahead with it in the next month. There's an access road ahead and pumping station that crosses private property, and we worked with the homeowner to a solution where we would basically fill in that path and with soil and seed and let it, I guess in their terms, reforest or grow back. It's been used as a footpath, but to avoid any incidences or liability infractions, it's in both their interest and the park's best interest to have that, I guess, closed off as best it can. We had some decorative lamp post that was damaged in the winter. We just got that replaced in the lower parking lot at the beginning of April. We also finally got a barrier gate installed in the upper parking lot at the beginning of April, which will help us in situations of snow removal and emergencies such as hurricanes, which we find when we have to close their park for reasons, whether it's something similar to COVID or an environmental situation. It's difficult keeping people out of the park, and having that extra gate that is closed at our discretion rather than the commissionaire's discretion helps keep the park safe in those situations. We're still going forward with installing speed bumps in the lower parking lot to diminish the amount of stunting that goes on in the summer. There are a lot of car shows that happen in the parking lot, which is totally fine, but sometimes that results in damage to park amenities, and we're hoping that this will diminish that. And as I mentioned earlier, that's the current focus in a lot of our operations in the park is on the roads. We're trying to prep Sailors Memorial Way and Heather, as those are the two main roads and areas being used for the North American Indigenous Games race in July. So both for the safety of the competitors and for the integrity of the park, we're going to focus on adding more material to those and regrading it. As well, we're going to be looking at regrading ARM as it's seeing significant depletion in material, which that'll be a larger job probably that'll have to be put through potentially to capital, but we're working on that at the moment. As I mentioned too previously, we are trying to go forward with phase 3 of the forestry thinning project, but again, it wasn't approved in the budget. Hoping that goes through next year because it's a part of the master plan for the park, and we would like to see that come to a close and move on to the next stage of the master plan. I guess two things I neglected to mention, but we'll mention now. We recently had the porta potties reinstalled, which is going fine. We had looked at putting them there in the winter, but they're now back from April till the end of November. We'd got additional ones last year to meet demands both in the parking lots and for not so much for Shakespeare by the Sea, but that area sees more isolated activity due to Shakespeare by the Sea. They get their own porta potties, but we had got one put down there last year just to be safe. So rather than the 3 porta potties we run through the summer, we're now up to 5, which should meet the demands. And also, there has been a food truck approved. They opened a lot of the permits for that across the city, both here and other major parks, but there will be a food truck in the lower parking lot throughout the summer season this year. That was approved through bookings over the winter, I believe. But I just spoke with the vendor today, and it was somewhat new to me that it was approved, so I thought I would mention it here. There used to be a canteen down there years ago, and they used to provide a permit to a food truck down there about 7 or 8 years ago, but is now returned. Other than that, not much more to update other than it's business as usual, and we're looking forward to what we can get done in the summer season. And I guess that's open to any questions that anyone has.
I've got a question.
Sure.
So 3 things. So first of all, the NASCAD installation is just terrific. I mean, it's really well done. It's I was actually walking through the park when a couple of the students were installing one of the art pieces, and they were friendly and really enjoyed discussing their art piece. And it's nice to see. It's a nice twist on things. You were talking about signage. In addition to that, if there's an opportunity, I know there's a lot of cyclists who hit the hill going down the main road towards the water.
Okay.
Yeah, and get a lot of speed there. If there's a sign just to kind of warn the cyclists to go slow because of the pedestrians and dogs and children, that would be the area kind of where the entrance is to the Shakespeare by the Sea.
Okay, yeah, like we're right like before it meets Heather and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's 2 hills.
Yeah, okay.
So there's the one there, and then the hill where it goes down at the very end, just towards the water.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and then and my question to you is, without the summer students, any concerns from you with regards to kind of operations or safety or anything like that, or will you be able to manage okay without?
So our operation runs out of Point Pleasant, and then we do also work in Sir Sanford Fleming Park, Hemlock Ravine, Linear Trail, and the Frog Pond, and are also responsible for special events. So operationally, the focus is just going to be more here rather than on the outside. I'd say we do have to have dedicated staff. Oh, we also do work in Fairview Cemetery and Camp Hill Cemetery. So the spread of the work we'll be able to achieve on the outside of Point Pleasant is of concern, but it's something we'll have to manage, as well as meeting the goals of the Special Events Task Force. The students really come in hand there, but it will, and I mentioned this in some of the meetings last year, that we'll still be able to keep up with the demands and regular operations, just maybe not at the how do I say this? We'll be a little more spread out and have to, although we'll be prioritizing the park at times due to operations outside the park, the park will have to be put off more often than it would in other years. So for safety concerns, I would say no concerns there, but it would just be more of a juggle on an operational end to make sure everything's accounted for. Because we usually have 5 extra staff with students, and that usually helps with divvying up work and making sure everything's accounted for. But I would say in the last week or so, most of the operation has been focused entirely in the park. And that's usually how I work with staff, is look at what needs to be done here first, aside from absolute requirements outside, and then branch out. So we'll be operating at a hindrance, but we'll be doing our best.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
10.1.2, staff update on orienteering in Point Pleasant Park.
Okay, so when at the time that they had done the presentation, I believe it was 2 meetings ago, or the last official meeting, I spoke with bookings, and through the booking process, they don't approve off-trail access to groups that choose to book in the park. But I spoke with the previous supervisor, Steve Rice, who was in that role for almost 15 years. And he said in the past, it was approved, basically on a discretionary basis. They wouldn't let people do orienteering in the park at all times. They would have to go through the booking process. But he would approve it with the consideration that they focus on being mindful of both flora and fauna, but specifically smaller seedling trees growing in areas and try to remain outside of areas in the park that are seeing, areas that have gone through the thinning and are seeing new growth. So that would be on behalf, the orienteering group would have to take on that precaution. In the instance that they do go through the booking process, I would probably be asked whether or not I approve it. But at this time, I guess I would have to pass that on to the committee and say, if we're at that point where bookings structurally says no, but with all the bookings, they sometimes deviate from, I don't want to say rules, but guidelines, and ask me for perspective. If I were to approve something like that, I would want to know if the committee would be okay with that approval of an orienteering group coming in. So it's kind of, yeah, with what I've found, it's that there's no real absolute no for them to come in. It's basically a discretionary decision on behalf of myself and booking, and I wouldn't want to make that decision if the committee wasn't okay with having orienteering groups in the park. If that makes sense.
This is Ted. I support orienteering in the park.
What would be the downside of the approval?
The downside, I would, from my perspective, I'm for orienteering in the park, and seeing as the group that wants to do it there seems to be, I don't want to say their specialty, but it's not just a group of people saying, hey, we'd like to orienteer in the park. It's Orienteering Nova Scotia, a community group that they're doing this, I'm assuming, at all times throughout the province. So they wouldn't be people who are experimenting or new with orienteering. They'd be, I guess, veteran orienteering people. So with a group like that using the park, I wouldn't say there'd be a negative aspect of it, more if we approved any orienteering group, like just any, or advertised orienteering, or opened up, I guess, open the floodgates to any group to do orienteering. With the level of, I guess, ability and vocation of this group, I wouldn't see any negative effects other than if they were to do it frequently. Like if they were to do it once or twice a year, I wouldn't see a downfall. But say they were to end up booking every month, I wouldn't think that was a good idea, because it's too much activity off trail, and then that becomes almost an open advertisement to anyone to do it. So if it was approved, I would say it would, the negative end would come from the frequency, which I wouldn't approve that frequent of use.
What sort of age range of this group? Are these like young people, children, or young adults, or mixed ages, or what?
I believe they operate in the people running it, I believe, are in the are older, but they offer. I would say they offer. They want to run almost a large group where there's groups of varying ages involved. So and experience. So they had disclosed in their email request to booking that, you know, certain groups wouldn't be going in certain off trails because of their how much experience they have, where the more experienced and older people would be maybe going more off trail because they would have the experience and know what to be considerate of when going through the forest.
Thank you.
Wei Mason or Wei, please go ahead next.
Well, formal. So I agree with you, Ian. You know, this reminds me, it had only been a couple of years when I first started being on the committee since the concern about BMX biking or mountain biking off trail had been an issue. And
Right.
that has been forbidden for really good reasons, because it was causing tremendous damage to the, you know, to the park. And so I think, you know, as long as it's limited to a couple times a year and that it's monitored, which will just be you and the folks walking around seeing what the impacts are, I think it could be okay. If it became a regular thing, it's pretty fragile, and I think that you could see you know, damage happen pretty quickly. So I think we just have to manage their expectations that they're not going to be tromping all over the woods all the time.
Yeah, and I'm just looking back on the email there, and they even say like the lower level courses or groups they offer would only take part on already established roads and trails. So I think they offer it like some of the people doing the orienteering won't even be going off trail at all. And then they mentioned too that they wouldn't go near restricted areas, and then they would discuss with myself and park staff like what areas should we stay out of. And then they also mentioned that areas that they are in off trail, they may set a precedence of focusing on looking for already existing like footpaths in order to not create any further footpaths. So yeah, me, it's just the frequency and whether, and you know, if it's once or twice a year, sure, but the more it happens, then it's kind of, yeah, it would be too much, and then it would be harder to step back and say, okay, no more, because you don't want to play the blame game on anybody for any effects on the park.
Okay, so from this point, I believe we would need to have someone move, or I would like to create a motion that we do vote on this. Yeah.
If I may, Chair, there would be no need for the committee to pass a motion because you've all brought up your concerns and your support for the association for using the park for orienteering. So Ian and other park staff would take that back and provide the support that they would need.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So we will now vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Well, if we didn't have a motion, I don't think we need to vote. I think we can just
Okay,
move on.
sorry, I got confused there, wasn't sure.
All right.
So, okay, so moving forward, the HRM staff will have their information from us. They know how we feel, so then we can move on to the next point in our agenda. 11, any added items? And I don't see any here. The next point would be the date of our next meeting will
This
be.
is Ted. I was hoping that we could discuss the correspondence that was circulated since the last meeting. Would it be possible to to do that?
I believe that can be added, Ted, into added items. So, would you like to share what you want to bring up, and then we can
Sure.
talk about it?
Just questions, really. So one of them was with regards to the entrance at Chain Rock Drive. And there were some questions about the the state of the entrance. And I'm not even sure if that falls into the park's responsibility or if that's just part of the regular city maintenance. So
I can comment on that. So that would technically fall under like another department under, I guess, IMO or road ops and construction. Those were put in place, I believe, just before winter. And I had to do some digging around to realize that those weren't paid for by parks or implemented through parks. I believe Capital had money left over in the road ops and construction and to I guess bolster accessibility on entrances to parks off the roadway. They had added some up in Clayton Park on a trail we monitor on Linear Trail. So those were put in at that point, and I saw no. I was all for it as it only increases the accessibility to the park. I know the correspondence that came through that said that the residents living near it preferred it the way it was before, but in my position, I would say respectfully, it should stay that way because it only increases accessibility for the park and allows for users to enter at more locations, because they also redid one or two down on Point Pleasant Drive, entering off near the stone wall. So I think what had happened there is the work had been done in the fall, and there was still material left over just past the installed lip, post-construction material. That path is already gravel and such, but it wasn't compacted. And I guess with the heavy amounts of rain we got about 2 or 3 weeks ago, a lot of that washed into the roadway. So on that end, that would be service that would be taken on by Streets and Roads. Like if they were to put in a service request for that, street sweeper would come through and clean that up. I had staff look at the lip there and kind of assess whether we needed to add more material or change the material or move it, but they cleaned the site up and removed a lot of the gravel, which just seemed to be surface level, and now it's basically level with the entrance. I guess it was just an unfortunate circumstance of moving into the spring from winter. A lot of the upper parking lot sees the same thing with the concrete pad, which that's part of our operations every spring, is to focus on getting the crusher dust off of the concrete pads for both for safety and accessibility reasons. But unfortunately, the installation and budget for that was entirely decided without me knowing and outside of our operation.
do you know if the loose gravel was cleaned up?
From off the lip and off the trail and within the close area of the roadway, but I don't know about the main roadway, because I know some of it had washed farther down the road, more towards I forget what that road turns into after where Chain Rock changes into the next road. But
I guess my only thought on is if there's any way to pass the concerns along to the the crews that would normally clean those up, that would be useful.
Yeah, I can get eyes on that and tomorrow or next week, and then send a request into the sweeper shop, and if there still is existing crusher dust in and around the roadway there, and get them to see if they can add that to their queue.
Okay, that's great. It just keeps that goodwill, right, with the park community down there. The other one was the from the Halifax Military Heritage Preservation Society, and I guess they have concerns about the defensive structures in Point Pleasant Park. And I don't know a whole lot about that because I'm newer to the committee. And I'm sure there's been discussions on that in the past. And there was an invitation for people to do a walk through of some of the defensive structures. Is there any more information on this?
Is that the correspondence from William Breckenridge?
It is.
I guess that walkthrough is entirely facilitated by him and the other individual in the correspondence. So that's free for anyone to join. It's not associated with the park, or it's taking place in the park, but we're not involved in the planning for that or associated with that. That group had raised concern after, I guess, the budget had been approved for the shoreline renewal plans, and within that plans was what would affect the battery on the shoreline, which I believe is going to be removed, dismantled, or entombed. Yes, yeah. For many reasons, it's at a state where to preserve it and maintain it and bring it back to what it was would be incredibly costly. But also, when talking about cost, who foots that bill is also up for discussion, or not up for discussion, is a bit confusing, as I believe Natural Resources technically owns those. I think there's a lot of tie up in budget of who would be responsible for that. I met with William Breckenridge and Andy Fillmore, and an individual from Parks Canada, someone from the provincial government, and another individual from the provincial government, or the federal government, and to speak with William Breckenridge. And I guess all I can say is I'm not really sure where that's going to go with his concerns, because a lot of that has been decided, but we tried to communicate with him on all levels that it's an unfortunate state of affairs that they are in that shape, but to find the money and budget to do that is it's completely out of my wheelhouse, and there's no solution met yet, but that's all I can really comment on. That is preserving them would be incredibly costly, and as far as the ones within the park, those are still maintained to some degree, but the one on the shoreline, definitely not. So that group wants to see everything in the park maintained, and is in a position where they're not, they don't think the treatment that everything has got over the years suffices from a cultural perspective and historical perspective. But as I keep mentioning, though, a lot of that property is just tied up in a government brainstorm of who really is responsible and who has the money to pay for that maintenance.
Who maintains the other structures?
Other than the minimal amount that my staff does in terms of cleaning up vandalism, or sometimes some of the structures have eroded, like up at the Cambridge Battery. There was some brick that was entombed over a decade ago, but some of the brick walls have been vandalized and kicked in. So we worked on a solution to board those up. So those are now entirely closed for access. But other than making them safe and removing vandalism and the odd quick fix, I don't have any masons on staff, so we will do the odd quick fix for safety reasons. The minimal amount of stuff is done by staff, but I know Natural Resources had, or Parks Canada, Natural Resources had people in for a whole summer working on Martello Tower about 5 years ago. So for larger scale maintenance, that is covered through Parks Canada and the federal government.
Okay, so somebody has their eye on that. There's kind of a longer term plan to
Yeah,
They don't end up like the shoreline batteries.
Yeah, and I wasn't around when the previous ones were entombed, but you know, it wasn't an overnight decision to like let's entomb this. It's yeah, and the battery where it's placed is unfortunately it's too far gone to be able to save, and it poses more of a safety hazard than a cultural asset.
What happens with their petition process? Does that go through to council, or how does that make its way through the municipality?
If I may, I can actually speak to that. So the Halifax Military Heritage Preservation Society would have to submit the petition to the clerk's office, and basically say to which committee or council, or if it's regional council that they're submitting it to. And then that would be then sent to the committee and then follow that process from there. But I feel like Councillor Mason can add more information to that.
If I may, Madam Chair.
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm amazed I've made it this far because I'm actually hotspotting through my city phone because the internet is so bad at the Pines. So if I crap out, forgive me. So to kind of go back, since we have so many new members of the committee actually heard about the plan we had a presentation at the December 9th meeting. And that presentation was about the upcoming study to develop a shoreline design to adapt the park's shore to climate change and the kind of damage that we've been seeing happening increasingly because of sea level rise and more energetic storms. And that has increased the speed of erosion in the park. And so the committee was also told at that time that HRM is hiring an archaeologist to study the battery and record what's there and look at both batteries. There's the one more in the Northwest Arm side, that's the oldest one, and the Point Pleasant Park battery, what remains of that one. And this work is going to happen throughout this year. And then the shoreline design and the end state of the battery will get a recommendation, but none of that's been finalized. Unfortunately, the military heritage folks told people in December after that meeting that we were going to tear the batteries down. And William did an interview on the CBC that had to be corrected, and CBC issued a correction on that. I went on a couple of days later to provide the what's actually happening. You know, this is not the first time we've discussed this at the committee. The 8 years ago, we didn't have quorum, so it's not recorded, but we actually had a presentation from the former Parks planning manager, Peter Bigelow, and his team. And at that time, it was over $4 million to armor the bank. Every time we study this, we talk about, should we armor the bank and try and keep the park from getting smaller, or should we retreat from the ocean, move Sailors Memorial away where it floods and gets covered in rocks a little farther away, and entomb or knock down the battery, you know, and so that discussion has been happening, but the cost is pretty extraordinary. It's important also to note that the Point Pleasant Park master plan, the comprehensive plan created after Juan, said that these batteries on the shore should either be knocked down or entombed, right? They weren't considered historically to be like a priority. In the park, just to touch on a couple other things, in the park, there's a variety of ownership. Martello Tower is a National Historic Site maintained by Parks Canada. I think, and Ian, you can correct me, I think there's another one somewhere in the park. The Sailors Memorial is owned by the Commonwealth Graves. In fact, there's a person came down from Ottawa from their office to lay a wreath at Remembrance Day this year. The Bonaventure peacetime casualty, Bonaventure Anchor Memorial, was supposed to be maintained by the Navy back in the time when the Navy was much larger and would be able to just deploy 100 sailors to scrape and paint. Now it's kind of become more of a municipally owned thing. And then the other federal and imperial forts up on the hill had a higher priority in the Point Pleasant Park comprehensive plan, Cambridge Battery, and the other one whose name just went right out of my head. And so a bunch of work was done to remove trees whose roots were getting into those forts and stuff after one, and to try and keep them clear of that and maintain them as safe. But that's the only goal there. There's no plan to, manifestly rebuild them or turn them into significant heritage sites like the Martello Tower. So there's kind of like multiple owners, several layers of importance, and that kind of thing. But the big thing for the committee is the archaeological study is going to happen, and that will recommend, next steps, and that work is still underway. For my part, my personal view, it's like there were thousands of World War II pillboxes built. And forgive me if you've heard me say this before, but I remember coming when there were 10 or 12 meters more of shore in front of those, in front of those than there are now. And the really truly historic, the original battery was in front of the World War II battery, and there were these stone circles that had iron rails on them for the big old guns to be trained around, and all that's in the ocean. It's gone, right? It's now a part of the debris in the water on the other side of the shore. There are a lot of examples of well-preserved examples of World War II bunkers. I'm not convinced that these ones, the amount of money it would take to do what has been proposed by the military heritage people, by William, and build the shore back out 10 or 12 meters and armor that. First of all, it's a lot of money. But the second thing is that in a climate change situation like we have now, the water always wins. Like, we can spend a lot of money to build some dikes that will get overtopped in a major storm, and then we're still going to end up with damage. It might slow it down, but you can't stop it. So, there's a lot of discussions that are still to be had. And certainly if the archaeologist comes back and says, actually, there's some really important stuff inside of the already entombed part that needs to be saved, we can have that discussion. But something is going to have to be done, because the water at high tide comes into the fort, and it's really dangerous if people are in there. So something's got to happen. And we will make those. We'll be asked to advise Halifax and West and council on that this year.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else in our group have any questions or anything to add? I don't see any other hands up or anyone else request to speak. So we'll move from number 11, added items, to 12, date of our next meeting, which is July 6th, 2023. Seems extremely far away, but that will be 2 months, I guess. And then I will move to adjourn the meeting. Can I have a second?
I will second.
Thank you. And so that's it. Thank you, everyone. Oh, Wei has something to say.
Thanks, everyone. Just waving goodbye.
Oh,